Now let's get into consciousness. Let's start with the Greeks. We know that the Greeks were students in ancient Kemet. We can look at their words for what we would call consciousness, wisdom, to know, and we see the words from Kemet, the Kemetic language inside of those words, which gives us a comprehension of what they were taught, or rather what they comprehended from what we taught them, because we can't always assume that what they said is exactly as we taught it. A lot of it is just based on their comprehension. Some of it is based on what we chose to give them, because of one of the biggest lies that we see in the Western esoteric traditions, modern spirituality, is all this talk about the mysteries of Kemet, and people claiming they know the mysteries, right? And it's like the Greeks and Romans did not get all. Why would we give them all of so-called mysteries, knowing what they were doing, know what they plan to do? We have oracles, the top oracles being from Hetera, who some call Heteru or Heteri. Had oracles that were telling us what was going to happen. We had seers that would tell us what was going to happen. You could predict from the ages what would happen. So why would we give them everything? Why would we give them knowing what was going to ensue on this planet in the age of Pisces? So all that talk about the mysteries and having access to, no, it's not true. So the Greeks' perspective of consciousness, synadesis, meaning knowing together, has its roots in the Kemetic words shen atenu. Shen means curse. Shen means word of power. Shen or sin could also be where the Christians get the word sin from. Atenu, aten son, but atenu denotes a special son, a particular son, and we'll get there in a second. Atenu also means knots, and knots is very important in Kemetic and African traditions because knots signify wisdom. This process of untying knots, resolving the complexities to achieve clarity, is also represented in the Greek word Adonai. So you can see Adonai and Atenu have a phonetic resemblance. So Atenu, besides untying knots like an answer of the Akan, which deals with wisdom, Atenu also denotes a special sun, and that sun, it would be considered a black sun. And the black sun, if you look into the Western esoteric traditions and the alchemical practices, you can Google what the black sun and where its place is and what it means. And because Nu itself predates existence. Nu also has this connection with this realm of the warp. The with Nu are connected with this creation. So you're talking about the pre-created sun. And what that really, the Greeks are saying, and what they're trying to relay with that word, is saying that wisdom, consciousness, has to do with something that predates life, right? Consciousness has to do with a wisdom and with an awareness that predates life. I mean, the Aten, or the sun as we know it today, was in its pre-stage before what we would call the Big Bang. When it was in that pre-stage, that pre-circle, that pre-cycle, which is also a definition of Shen. And this equates with where you see in the yogic tradition, where you see in certain Eurocentric traditions, where they equate the true wisdom or the true existence with going back to what we would call the chaos realm, or the waters of Kemenu, or the waters of Nu. The realm before life sprung, as we know it, sprang up and the sun was born. They equate the true existence, the true knowledge, the true wisdom as going back before that, going into that realm of what some might even call death. And you'll see that in their literature, when they speak about their rituals and when they speak about their perspective. So for the Greeks, consciousness was about this alignment with the sun, whether it was pre-sun, this alignment with the cycle of the sun. Let's move on to the Western definition of consciousness. In the Western world, consciousness is defined as something that is primarily rooted in the brain. This view reduces human beings to being thinking animals. Consciousness then being a form of animal awareness, that man is a beast. We see this in Darwinism. Remember the famous French philosopher René Descartes, where he's, I think, therefore I am. Consciousness as the ability to reflect on thought. In this model, if you can reflect, you're conscious. But this definition is limited because it focuses solely on mental processes, ignoring the spiritual dimensions, as we know at this time in Europe, when they were achieving like another awakening of the dark age. It was like the second or third awakening out of what they call the dark ages. This Renaissance was about pretty much what even their own ancestors called spirituality in favor of really tangible physical things. And that's where we get these very physical and tangible definitions of everything, where if you speak to somebody about spirituality or energetics, especially in America, they tend to reject it, right? Oh, that ain't real. I don't believe that. It becomes about belief and all these things. So that unseen world, that spiritual world, is rejected based on these concepts. And the problem is that when you have these concepts of consciousness, that's going to create more problems when you go in there to meditate, as once again, consciousness is the measurement of something that they can read on a machine in a hospital somewhere or something else, right? Not about a seer or a priest or priestess or a healer that can the energetics, right? That can sense the chi flowing in your acupuncture points, flowing in your the Kemetic perspective, flowing in your nadis from the yogic perspective. People who can see, sense, feel those things all these things are consciousness, right? Are then deemed to be unreal according to the Western model of consciousness, which is changing with quantum physics and certain things that have been released to the public. Certain classified information has been released to the public. These things are changing, but they're still behind. And there have been many there have been many high-ranking, military personnel in America that's Americans not taking the consciousness and the psychic elements of life serious, and how it is behind the rest of the world, where you have Russia, where they have specialized psychics, and other governments, they are able to see where certain weapons are hidden. All this stuff, merely not opposing this psychic or this energetic aspect of consciousness, this spiritual dimension of life, while we in the Western world are still catching up to define that. And it started back during this Renaissance, with this so-called Renaissance with Rene Descartes. Now, why do we as Black ancestral people, as Africans, say that there's a problem with the idea that you are a thinking animal, that your consciousness represents the advanced form of animal awareness? Some people heard me say that and said, well, what's the problem with that? Part of why you think that is because of Darwinism. So it's very important to distinguish the difference between an animal and a human, and what makes us different in terms of what we perceive as consciousness. A lion's awareness of its environment is not the same as human consciousness. A lion can't verbalize abstract ideas, can't reflect on the past and future, or suppress instincts with moral reasoning. Now, this is where the Kemetic part in being a Black person comes in. In specific, Black human beings, possess the Ab, right? Talking about Black people right now. This is not a discussion of if Europeans or anybody else, right? I'm talking about Black people. Black people are usually born with a Ka. And this Ka is connected to your prefrontal cortex, meaning that we can make decisions, right? As we get older, a child is not born with a fully developed prefrontal cortex, but as we get older, we can make moral decisions, moral judgments. We can suppress. When it's time for a lion to eat, it gets up and it hunt down that food. When it's time for us to eat, we'll be like, I got something better to do. Let me just finish up. Let me just finish writing this, doing this thing over here. That ability to make that reflection, to plan it, to strategize on it, and say, I'll eat in 2 hours. Lions can't do that. That reflects a certain aspect of awareness that animals do not possess. And part of why you have that ability, once again, is because of at least an Ab. Because everybody doesn't have a Ka, but at least an Ab gives you the ability to try to reflect and plan and strategize in that manner. Now, because of this, we'll get into this more when we talk about meditation in specific. Because of this, the ability to program yourself, the ability to change your behavior, ability to achieve the things that modern spirituality talks about, all the success and the health and the wealth and the visualizing what you want in the world, is already jaded because it's approaching it from the perspective of you being an animal. And we'll get into more of that later. Another example or an expression of consciousness in the Western world is brainwaves. So you have your gamma, your beta, your alpha, your theta, your delta waves. And one of the issues with this is that it is misinterpreted by calling it brain waves. The alpha, theta, this whole band of waves that or oscillations, neural oscillations is what they call it in the scientific literature, is not just in your brain. It happens all over your body. Your body, you have gamma waves going through your kneecaps. Sometimes you got alpha waves, right, going inside of your quadriceps muscles. And this concept of consciousness being all over the body is something that we see in the Shen in Chinese medicine, and it's also something that we see inside of the Ab in Kemet, where they say that the vessels, they may do, you can feel the flutters in the consciousness of the heart. This is in the Kemetic medicine. Now, one of the biggest issues in modern spirituality with the brainwaves situation is that they over-rely on alpha waves. Now, alpha waves are very important. They can lead to relaxation, but in terms of neuroplasticity, alpha waves are not very good in changing habits and changing behaviors. Now, when we get down to the theta and the delta waves, which are slower brain waves often associated with healing and subconscious access, that can help you change your behavior, but it's a process. They say you access the subconscious, but it takes place over time. It requires repetition. That's why you see in a lot of these so-called meditation systems today, they talk about being repetitive. Repeat the visualization multiple times. Repeat the affirmation multiple times. And not to say that that doesn't work and that cannot assist you, but because it is a slower process, it requires a certain discipline. And when we make that applicable to the world today, particularly in America, we don't really have that kind of discipline. So that's why the law of attraction, that's why certain meditative practices have not yielded a lot of success for people who are not even black, non-black people as well, because the repetition, the energy, and once again, as we said earlier, man, know thyself. From a Kemetic perspective, even my meditations have to be aligned with reality, aligned with the astrological cycles. You could visualize all you want. You could affirm all you want if it is a cycle. If that chakra is not open for purification, right, in accordance with the astronomical cycles, then you're not really doing anything. It'll be superficial transformation. So and also with theta and delta, some of the other problems is that it may not, from a Kemetic perspective, it may not address the ancestral trauma, right? We'll talk about this more later on with the whole affirmations, law of attraction thing. You're not going to affirm your way out of ancestral trauma. Especially not with the brainwaves that are going to be more required for dealing with ancestral trauma, dealing with those deeper level of consciousness. It's going to occur with gamma waves. Right, when we're hitting the drum and banging the drum and jumping and what people might call ecstatic trance, those can facilitate hitting those deep parts of ancestral consciousness. Those facilitate and are even more effective in driving neuroplasticity and change. You say affirmations in the delta state, the theta state, it could take a while to happen, if it does happen at all. You say it in a gamma state, or you say it in a gamma theta coupling state, we're talking about stuff manifesting very quickly for you. And don't be fooled by modern spirituality saying that if it manifests quick, it may not be. Some things manifesting quick are actually a good thing. You might be on an accelerated path. And when it comes to reunifying with your ka, many of us get put on an accelerated path because of that. So if we've been going left for a couple years and we start to reunite and engage our ka again, right? We do, as the Yoruba talk about Igbo, for the rituals to bring back our Ori Inu. You might have to get back on an accelerated path to get you back on the path because of the time that you've lost being off the path. So all this to say is that consciousness from a Western perspective treats humans like computers, reprogramming behaviors without addressing the soul or the divine consciousness. And one of those reasons is because it does not have that relationship, has not had that relationship with what in Kemet we would call divine consciousness, Ka. The Subek Ra meditation system recognizes that we have Kati, animal instincts, just like animals, right? But we also have an Ab, we also have a Ka. Elements that cannot be conditioned or just programmed based upon breathing a certain way based upon relaxation, based upon these Western definitions of consciousness. Let's move on to a Kemetic definition of consciousness. Kemetic spirituality, consciousness is not just brain activity. Consciousness, divine consciousness, is what you get from Kanum. It is your Ka. When you are a Ba, right, a spirit, you're a spirit, you have a spirit. That spirit has consciousness as well, has memories. But when you are on the spiritual plane, you don't have those memories. You're not conscious of it, right? Many of us cannot remember what we were doing when we were in the spiritual world, unless we are enlightened ancestors, unless we have a connection with our ancestors. Ancestors can tell us things about ourselves, but ultimately we don't remember that conversation that we had with Kanum, or with what people will call a supreme being. We say supreme beings or supreme mother, supreme father, right? There's not just one unified being that is a male. When you are given a Ka, you're also given a physical body. You're given an Ankh, you're given the breath of life to send you in your mother's womb upon conception. This synchrony between mind, body, and spirit, creates this holistic definition of what we call consciousness. But it's very important to understand that you do not have a consciousness. You're not conscious according to Kemetic principles unless you are united and connected with your Ka. We see this in the great sage Ptah in his book about the instructions and the maxims of Ptah when he talks about a living death, right? And it's constant, for all the talk that you hear people mention about this great book, you don't really hear people often mention about the statements that he very explicitly made about the Ka. One of the statements he makes about having a living death is that he's saying that when you do not have your Ka, you're essentially a living death. And this is why you'll see that the Ka is also denoted as life force, vital force of the Ba. The Ba is you, the spirit, what some people call the soul, the solar force. But the energy that allows the Ba to manifest into the world, to allow you to go into your mother's womb, is the Ka. If you don't have that, through behavior that violates your Ka, through what we would call criminal behavior, through what the ancient Kemites would call isfet, your Ka will detach from your head and it will leave. We see this in Akan with the Kra. We see this in Yoruba with the Ori Inu, where people have to do these rituals to bring it back to themselves because of the behavior or whatever have you that has triggered it to detach. So what Ptah is saying is that what we would call criminal behavior, or behavior that is not aligned with my eye, causes that enter, which is representative of your Ka, whoever he or she is, to detach, because your Ka also represents your destiny, your purpose. And if you are behaving in a manner that does not align with that, then what is that consciousness staying there for? What is it? It's a waste, right? You're not listening to the wisdom. You're not getting granted the power, so it leaves. So there are rituals in Akan, there are rituals in Yoruba, and there are rituals in Kemet to bring the Ka inter, whoever it is. Maybe it's Hetera, maybe it's Sekumet, maybe it's Bes, maybe it's Herubehuda, to bring it back so that you may be in alignment. But the thing about us in our relationship, as I said, with consciousness, is that your physical body must be able to receive that Ka. As I said earlier, it's mind, body, and spirit. So consciousness for us is a dynamic process that ties together words, medu, the body, kat, and wisdom, rok. Now, why do we say this? Why would this be the definition of consciousness, or what we might say medu rok? Medu as a defining meaning of consciousness. And why do we say it? All we have to do is look at children. When you see children develop and their consciousness, their awareness develop, you see that it is aligned with physical development and milestones and speech. When a child is able to lift their head up, when they're able to sit up, when they're able to move in certain ways, it's already been equated with a certain level of intelligence and awareness. When they're able to use certain words, usually in a certain standard for other kids, they equate it with a certain level of intelligence, a certain level of consciousness. And this is very important for Black people because we develop quicker. We develop faster than other groups of people when it comes to this development of consciousness. It's showing this very deep ancestral blood relationship that we naturally have with the Ka. And part of that development is also related to melanin. I'm not going to get into it right now, but part of that development and that acceleration is related to melanin. Because of this triad of speech, physical development, and intelligence being this circle of consciousness, we then understand how, based on the Subek Ra meditation system, based on Kemetic meditation, how we then go realign ourselves, how we then engage in our active transformation and active spiritual growth. I can sit down and do all the affirmations I want, or I can do my best to purify my ab. I can do my best to purify my ab and try to align with my ka. But if my physical body is weak, if it is untrained, if it itself is impure, and this is a scale, this is not some absolute, I'm either impure or I'm not, or I'm either purified or I'm not. There's a scale. None of these things can take place. My ka returning to me has to return already with some aspect of my physical body being in alignment with it, because it has to anchor, it has to hold. This is why when Khanum gives you a ka, he also fashions your physical body. This is why in certain spellings of the physical body, it's just a pluralization of the ka, right? You have ka, K-A, some say K-H-A. You have the physical body, K-H-A-T, or K, we pronounce it kat, or some will write it as K-A-T, right? It's a pluralization. T is also a letter that dictates duality, force, and also manifestation. So for us, once again, our divine consciousness, what we are trying to align our will with, does not take place without what we do to our physical body. And this is one of the reasons why the Ankh exercise system is paired with the Subek Ra meditation system. Now, one of the other reasons that Ptah talked about a living death, and he talked about wisdom, this book is based upon him being a sage and writing wisdom, is that wisdom, rok or rek, is always been a marker of defining if you even have wisdom. For our ancestors, it's not enough as it is today, how people define it, to read a book, to take in the information. They say that they really know that you are wise from your speech, from the words that you use, from the actions that you take. That dictates if wisdom is truly manifested. And usually that wisdom that is being referred to has to do with your ka. Because another way to say wisdom is not just rek with the KH, it would also be reka or raka, meaning mouth of the ka. And what does the mouth of the ka mean? It means that enter in your head that gives you wisdom, that guides you, that tells you to do this, don't do this, that you go to when you meditate. Should I do this? Should I not do this? What is best for me? What is best for my family? What is best for my nation? Now we see this re in other African languages. Yoruba, ro equals to reflect deeply, to think, a connection with meditation. Ro, you see in the Maasai, oloboni, a seer or a wise leader, where you see this O sound, meaning this reflection of wisdom outwardly. This is why we say rok, because that O sound, that intonation, has to do with manifesting wisdom outwardly. Now, once again, there's going to be some people saying there were no vowels in Kemet. You're wrong. Just because we didn't write vowels doesn't mean that we did not pronounce them. If you listen to a baby, if you listen to any child talk, children and all races of people, all of their sounds are based on vowels before they speak. Ooh, right? A baby says, has something to do with gas, right? A baby might have something to do with the baby's uncomfortability. Once again, in the oral traditions, when those words were said, based on the intonation of the words, even when you listen to some of Yoruba's words, even though it may be spelled a certain way or spelt the same way, when you listen to the intonation or the pitch of how it is said, it determines a different meaning. And that is the restructuring of Kemetic linguistics that is taking place and really needs to happen, because people like Wallace Budge, certain Egyptologists, they've done the best that they can do. Their racism only gets them so far, and for others who truly want to know, it only gets them so far because they lack the ancestral context to truly understand those vibrations. They were not built from that. Their nervous system, their blood was not molded from the context of those words. That is for us to do. So to summarize, for us, consciousness is this synchrony of speech, physical, neurological development, and awareness. And for us, once again, while we say the Subek Ra meditation system is the only one that is specifically focused on the physiological and spiritual needs of Black people, we need to understand that we are considered to be accelerated in terms of our development, in terms of melanin. And of course, this idea of acceleration or advancement is really based on the standard being European. So when they say that we are advanced or whatever, they're saying that because we go beyond what they have said the standard is. Or when they say that our babies are born small, they're saying because their babies are the standard. And we need to understand that when it comes to our physiology, our Blackness, a lot of things that we get diagnosed with, that we don't get diagnosed with, is based upon these racial and ethnic differences, which sometimes are large and sometimes they're minuscule. Right? Sometimes it's not really that much a difference between a Black American and a white American having a certain disease or whatever, merely based on us being in the same environment. And other times there is. For example, the body fat ratios between Black women and white women create this scenario, because white women become the standard, create a standard where you have Black women being misclassified in their body fat, because Black women hold their body fat in places that, right, white women don't hold their body fat. This misclassification causes a lot of problems. Black people have a larger left ventricle in our hearts. That affects our cardiorespiratory system. That affects how we do cardio. That affects our fitness levels and therefore our fitness goals compared to other groups of people. That's not talked about. And I tell you from my own personal research as an energy medicine therapist, as a healer, that there's definitely an intention to hide these, especially when the literature or the data might say that other groups of people might be what they call superior in regards to Europeans. Remember, in enslavement, and for well over 100 years, America, particularly Europeans, justified enslavement, talked about race, talked about skull shapes to justify our enslavement, to justify them saying that we're inferior, that race was a big thing, race was a real thing. Now, once they start doing these studies in the 70s and 80s, particularly with melanin and genes and recessive and dominant genes, and they start to see some facts, then the conversation changes. It's no longer about race, then becomes, in the colleges across America, a social construction. It's no longer genetic and biological, when it started to show that there were these abnormalities in terms of our comparisons, in terms of our muscle development, our muscle strength, our body fat, our heart development, our even fascia in our nervous system is different, which affects our brain development. And melanin doesn't just influence your skin color, it also influences how you create dopamine, how you create norepinephrine. These are neurotransmitters that are very important for your nervous system, very important for your motivation, very important for your joys of life, which Black people are known for having and loving. Now we've dealt with consciousness, the perspectives of the Western world, the perspectives of the Greeks, the perspectives of Kemet. Let's move on to